by Chasing the Rainbows with your host, Bernice Quisenberry.
On this week's episode, it is called Brooke Marie. My name is Bernice, and I'm the founder of Chasing the Rainbows and Cried Out Loud podcast. I was going to forego this week because I don't have a co-host, but I also thought that this was a great opportunity for me to get my story out there for other survivors to hear, because I get a lot of questions in support groups, mentorships, and also, through the podcast about my story and what happened to our Brooke. And with that said, I thought this was the perfect time for me to go ahead and do that. I'm going to try to do this without, just make it through. Doing it alone is hard, but it at least cuts my pain in half each time that I do tell this story. And knowing that this might be able to help or support other fellow survivors in doing it. So that's what's giving me my strength to do so. So with that said, I'm just going to dive right in. My husband and I, when we met, we were friends first, and we were friends for a while, and then before we got together, and our love for each other was very fast and furious when we did get together because we were really close friends beforehand. So we dated about 10 months before we got married, and we knew that we wanted to have more kids. Both of us thought, we each had one, that we did not want to have any more children, but when we met and got together, it just felt right, and it was something that we both wanted, and it was something that we didn't, have in our life plan before that. So when we were trying to get pregnant with Brooke, it was really difficult. We dealt with about 1.5 years of secondary infertility, and it was because of me. I had a lot of cysts, fibroids, and polyps that like to hang out in my uterus and have a party and grow and, do all those things. And I've had surgeries already, and so it caused scar tissue, and our son at that time was 8. So, I've had those surgeries all throughout, that time and not realizing what it was doing or what it was causing. So when we were trying to get pregnant, we realized that this was going to be a problem, and that, I also had really irregular periods, very heavy periods and menstrual cycles. So, it was really difficult. So we started with the tracking and all of those things. And then I did have to get a mass removed, which helped tremendously with the next steps. And that helped to get us pregnant with Brooke. And when we found out, it felt like a dream. I remember it was I think it was in August of 2020. And it was like right in the midst of our pandemic that was happening in America. And I was just so excited. I mean, both of us we took probably about 12 pregnancy tests because, I couldn't just trust one. But it did. It felt like a dream finally coming true for us. And around pregnancy was going really well. I didn't really have a lot of pregnancy symptoms besides some nausea at the beginning, and everything felt good. And then around 10 weeks, I had a lot of bleeding that occurred one night and cramping, and I started to panic a little. And so the next day, I went into the hospital and I got checked, and they thought that since it was early, it was either the miscarriage of a multiple or it was my placenta implanting, and that's what caused it. But they were fairly certain that it was probably a miscarriage. But at that point, I having Brooke, and she was okay, and everything was fine in there. I honestly didn't put too much thought into it. And it was more like, okay, I'm just concerned moving forward. What is this going to look like? Well, after that, everything was healthy and going well with our pregnancy. I had a little bit of anxiety around the pregnancy with that bleeding and things like that, but really had no other issues. I mean, I stopped running after that point because I was only running like 1 or 2 miles 2 or 3 times a week. But I just was so tunnel visioned with my pregnancy. And I also watched every little thing I ate or drank by Googling every little thing to the point that it was obsessive, but it gave me peace of mind doing that. And that's what I needed to do. When we were about 26 weeks in, I noticed a quarter size amount of old blood. So it looked like that brownish red blood that came out. And it only happened once or twice one day. And then I had my doctor's appointment the next day. So I was like, okay, when I go into the doctor's, I'll let them know. I called them. They said, yep, you can wait until you come in tomorrow and let's talk about it with the doctor. I was like, okay, great. So I was still feeling the baby move. I was feeling everything. Everything was going fine and well. And up until this point too, I've had multiple ultrasounds and was also being followed by maternal fetal medicine because I was 35 at this time. But we had no genetic issues. We had no signs of any precursors with any problems. So, nothing to be alarmed about because blood does come out sometimes during pregnancy. So I get into the doctors, and just to be safe, they send me over for an ultrasound over at the hospital. Well, when you go in for those emergency ultrasounds, they fit you in really quick and they don't give you pictures, which is completely understandable. And so I went in, everything looked great. Fluid was great. Everything was perfect. And honestly, they said, I was supposed to have an ultrasound the next week. And they said, you don't need to have it now because we just checked you. Everything looks great. And they said, if you want to feel free to cancel, go ahead. Well, I get home, and since my husband wasn't along with me for that appointment, and also since we weren't expecting that emergency ultrasound at that point, we both said to each other, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. We already hit our deductible for the year because everybody knows how that goes when you're pregnant. And also, we wanted more pictures, and we wanted to see her together one last time before, we go in to give birth to her pretty much. So the next week, it's about 5-6 days later, we go in for that ultrasound at maternal fetal medicine. And that's when we were told that we had no fluid anywhere and that there was rupturing of the membranes somewhere, somehow. The weird thing was, though, I never experienced leaking or noticing any water coming out or any puddle of water in my bed or when I was peeing, nothing, or like anywhere, any signs of it. So for me, I was like, what? I was all of a sudden, the second we heard that from the doctor, I felt like I was having this outer body experience where I was looking down on myself and I could not hear or process anything after that. I was so confused. I almost got lightheaded. It's that gut-wrenching feeling that you just got sucker punched. And what? And then being told, we need to put you on bed rest in the hospital. We need to monitor you and the baby, and we need to do it up until delivery. So then at this point, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what about our son at home? What am I going to do? What is life going to be like? Work? You go through this whirlwind of everything. My life is going to completely change. Now I'm going to be stuck in a hospital bed for the next 6 to 8 weeks that they were hoping for, because at this point I was 27 weeks and 5 days. So they were hoping to at least get me to 36 weeks. Or sorry, so that would be 8 weeks in the hospital, or you get what I'm saying. Regardless. So as I'm going, to the hospital, they're giving me antibiotics, steroids to make sure, just in case if we do have to go in for delivery, that her lungs are fully developed, everything, is going well. So they started pumping me full of all that stuff. Also, wearing a monitor and had a hospital room and all of that. Well, being there for 2 days, at nighttime, her heart rate was tanking. And so each time they would give me juice to drink, and I, of course, wasn't sleeping in the hospital. I was also up moving around, laying on the one side versus the other, and doing all the things that I needed to do. Well, after the second night, at 4 a.m., maternal fetal medicine came in to do a scan, and they said, yep, it's time for her. Her heart rate's tanking. I need to talk to your doctor, but it's looking like we're going to go into delivery. So I was like, oh my gosh, what does this even mean? At 28 weeks pregnant, exactly on the day. Oh my gosh, I was not expecting this. With our son, we had, I had no issues, and the pregnancy itself was very easy. So this all just sounded so foreign to me. It was just confusing. And these 2 days of this hospital, it was just, what is happening? So my husband gets in around 5:30, and we go in for a C-section, and Brooke ended up being delivered. And when she came out, she was healthy. Her lungs were fully developed. Her brain was fully developed. She just needed a little CPAP to help with some of the oxygen. But outside of that, she didn't need to be intubated. She didn't need any of that stuff. But for a week, we couldn't hold her because it took that long. The baby, Brooke, had to stay in her oscillate because for a week it takes to do the brain scans and everything. So they don't want to move her, at least from what I recall with it. So for 1 week, I couldn't hold my baby, and I could only just go in and touch her and see her laying there and just talk to her and spend time with her. And so I was in the hospital recovering from my surgery. I believe it was for 6 days. And they said the hardest part of this journey was going to be walking out of the hospital that day without her, and then having to do this NICU life, which we were not accustomed to or didn't know what we were getting into. So when I was released from the hospital, it was extremely difficult. And thank goodness for our support system, my husband, my parents, because you're not allowed to drive for about 3 weeks after a C-section. So they drove me in every day. I would stay there for about 10 hours, and I would then, once cleared to hold her, I would do marathon holds with her. And I would sit in there for 8 to 10 hours and hold her as long as I could. And, as I'm trying to pump and, make sure that I'm staying hydrated and eating, but just having her on my chest, just feeling that connection with her was so important and strong. And I just needed her to know that we were here and that she needed to continue to fight and continue to get healthy and grow. And that's exactly what she did for 5.5 weeks in the NICU. She was looking great. Her numbers were great. Her weight, she was thriving. Everything was looking great. And the day before she passed, I was even talking with the doctors about potential discharge dates, also about when we were going to try to breastfeed, because we were doing the sucking machine and getting her ready and all of those things. So I was just really excited with the path that this was heading. Now she was 33 and a half weeks. That's how they tracked her, looking at it when she was in the NICU. So that was Monday, March 15th. March 16th. I get a call at 4 a.m. to say that she started to throw up breast milk and her belly got hard. And the doctors weren't very concerned at that point or alarmed. They thought that maybe it was from the CPAP pushing oxygen into her belly. And they said these are kind of, fairly normal situations that can happen. But it was a little concerning because she's never really thrown up breast milk or anything before. So my husband and I go into the hospital, and they also wanted to warn us because they were going to intubate her at that point. So we go into the hospital and we see her, and I just collapsed to the floor. And I just knew something was completely off and wrong. And in that moment, just looking at her, I couldn't hold her that whole day because they kept doing testing. They kept doing everything. They didn't know there was like 4 possible case scenarios that was happening with her. And honestly, everyone was just hoping and praying that she was going to pull through this and that it was just a bad day in the NICU. And those bad days happen. Alarms are constantly going off when you're in the NICU, oxygen levels and things like that. And so you're always hearing alarms. You're always hearing just things that needed to be done to our babies that are in there. And so that's all I was hoping for. It was just a bad day, that tomorrow's going to be a better day. And so around 4 hours of being in the NICU, they said to us, if you would like your parents to come in and meet her, because since we were in the pandemic, right, this is March 16th of 2021, the hospital restrictions were still up with everything. We were still masked up. We could only have me and my husband in there to see her. So they said, invite your parents in. Well, that's when we started to know that, this isn't looking good. There has to be something really wrong here. And then the pastor came over to greet us and to say that they were there and everything for us. And so it just was a nightmare, and we were just living it that day. So my parents come in, they finally get to meet their granddaughter because they FaceTime me every day for a couple hours. So at least got to see her that way and got to, talk to her, and she got to know them. So it was wonderful that my parents got to come in and see her. So around 12:30, I finally look at a nurse around 12:15 and I say, hey, should I start pumping? Because I didn't pump all day, and it was because of like just everything, all the events that were going on, and my boobs were leaking and they were in so much pain. And so I started seeing, I had a lot of people there, my parents and all the medical team constantly in and out. So I started pumping in a corner with a thing over, I forget what they're called right now, talking about it. But anyways, I had like a cover thing up. And all of a sudden at 12:30, I start to hear her crash. And then all of a sudden, I see 2 nurses running in with the crash carts and all the doctors coming in, all of the nurse practitioners, everybody, and they start working on her. And at that point, my parents, my husband and I, has to rip my pumps off, get all cleaned up, clothes real quick. We're standing in a corner watching all of this, and we watch it for about 45 minutes. In comes the respiratory therapist, and we're like, let's throw some nitrous on her as like a Hail Mary and all this stuff. And it was just like, what do we do? Like, how do we do this? How do we process this? So 45 minutes of just seeing them hit her with different things to help and watching them do compressions. It was just seeing our worst nightmare play out. And so the doctors look at us and they say, you know, we can keep going as long as we need to, but after we stop all of this, she will pass. And so, you know, my family turns to me and says, you know, it's time. Like, there's just nothing else we can do here. And they were right. I mean, watching her suffer like that and watching what they were doing and all of that, like, oh, like what kind of life, or if she wouldn't have one, you know, at that point, and then finding out later what she died of, it all made total sense. So I went to her bedside and I watched as they kept doing compressions, and they, you know, they gave me that choice, and I said, okay, well, let's take everything off of her and let me hold her while she passes then. So then at least she's in her mom's arms. So she passed away on my right arm as we sat down, and I told her I was so sorry that I couldn't do more for her and, you know, to watch after us. Whew. So after that happened, we spent about 8 hours in the hospital with her. And so did my parents, and then also my sisters. I have 3 sisters. They, you know, the aunts got to come in, got to spend time with her. And so we got this private room. We got pictures of her. We were given a bunch of items like these care boxes and books, and thrown a bunch of literature. And I just kept saying to them, like, what support groups are out there? And they're like, well, we think this one has one once a month, and this one might have one once a month. And I was like, when are they? And who do I contact or reach out to? And they're like, oh, we think it's like on their website information, whatever. And I was like, what? So we left the hospital that day with a bunch of stuff. And when that happened, I mean, that stuff is really important. We have it in a box right now. And if I ever feel like I want to get it out, or I, you know, want to look at it and sit with it, I will someday. But you know, it was like, where do I turn to get a support group or talk to a survivor network that understands, where I don't have to get on Facebook into a page, or, you know, just where do I go? What do I do? So I said to my husband, this cannot be it. This cannot be the only things that we are given, and this is all we have to work with. I said, someday I am going to change. I am going to do something, and I'm going to make sure that survivors know that there is support out there, and there is a network of survivors behind you. What came next after all of that, leaving the hospital that day, going home, just not having the energy, being in bed for a couple days. I was blessed that we had family around us. My husband's twin brother and sister-in-law came in and stayed with us for a week. My parents, my sisters, and their families were just all around us. I did not foresee or know how significant this pain was going to be, or what was, you know, to come. The things that, you know, did happen, it was really hard for me to shower. And I'm not saying just because I was depressed or really down and out. It was because, you know, the last time that I held Brooke, that Monday night, before I put her away, and before then on Tuesday with the events of everything, I didn't shower that morning like I planned to. And I didn't want to wash her off of me. She plays with my hair when I was holding her. She would touch me, you know, just all of those things. So my sisters had to help me sponge bathe, for example. Also, it was just all the emotions around it all. And where do we go from here? What do we do? How do we process all of this? And then on top of it, you know, trying to figure it all out, especially for our son, who was really looking forward to having his first sibling. And so it was just all a whirlwind around it all. Didn't know up from down, couldn't keep anything, like couldn't read anything. I was given a few books in the hospital. There was no way I was reading that, at least for a while. I couldn't focus on anything else. I was just fully consumed in my grief, and I didn't know what else to do. And so, I was like that for a couple months. I tried reaching out every now and then to a couple nonprofits in the baby loss world that I found or were given information about at the hospital, but none of them had daily support groups, and nor could I keep a calendar of when they would meet once a month or when. And I don't want to go in person either. That was the thing. It was really hard for me because you have to return to everyday life. Once you're cleared from your doctor to go back to work, and once, if your baby passes, you're given 3 days to grieve in America, and then you return to work. So, trying to hold it all together, hold down a job, you were consumed, and we had an episode about this with all of the guilt and all of those feelings around just trying to return and be this person, because you don't recognize the person that you are anymore. You're a completely different person after this happens, and you're trying to figure that out while you're still trying to figure out what life is and where do you go from here. So, I was trying to build a survivor network. I was reaching out to people because I couldn't be on Facebook. I didn't want to be in the support pages on Facebook or anything like that. And so I was grateful that, I was one of my friends that I grew up with reached out to me on Messenger after she found out that we lost our baby. And we actually ended up, ironically, getting together on October 15th of 2021, which is National Baby Loss Awareness Day. And it was weird because we both didn't know it or recognize the date. We just planned to get together, and it was like a month before we just planned it and scheduled it, and then it happened. And I didn't know what I was going to be feeling like that day because, this was then like 6 months after the loss of Brooke, and it was still, really difficult to know what was going to happen or how I was going to feel or process things, from day to day. And nor did I want to put that pressure on myself either. But ended up getting together. Her and I started chatting and just realizing the lack of support groups out there or daily support was just mind-boggling to both of us. And so we continued to keep this talk going because I said, someday we are going to repurpose our pain. We are going to be able to help other survivors to not feel this alone, isolated feeling like we both felt so much during the whole process. So after having her and then reaching out to a few other survivors and just from talking about my loss and getting it out there, to friends and things like that and getting connected to these people, it was great because then I didn't feel alone and I felt like my feelings and thoughts were justified with what I was going through. Because those darkest of days that I talked about, not being able to get out of bed, having to set alarms to eat, being reminded to drink fluids, showering, all of those things that were so difficult. And then on top of that, having to pump and continue to do that instead of just cutting it off, based on what can happen to a woman and the infections and things like that if they do. So it was just like all these things I had to process alone. And, so after months and months of talking about this, after we just realized all of this, on September 12th of 2022, I founded Chasing the Rainbows, a 501c3 nonprofit. And what we started with is trauma-informed, free and daily, peer-to-peer support groups that are virtual to anyone across the U.S. And then we also are doing individual mentorships. They're also trauma-informed, where we do daily check-ins by text, phone call, emails, however the survivor wants it. And then also we started this podcast in July as an extension of that. So if someone doesn't feel like they want to reach out or don't have time to reach out to a mentor or to reach out to or be in a support group, well, then they have this podcast to listen to at least hear a survivor and understand, we get what you're going through and we're building it. So hopefully, if there's a topic that is resonating with them that day or is in their feelings and emotions, they'll be able to find it because it's all about, living after loss and living with our losses. And then also, we have professional resources. We refer people out because we aren't therapists and we know that. So we have this referral network where we can get people in pretty immediately with therapy. So they're not waiting and, because there is that 90-day wait or sometimes, therapist office aren't even accepting new clients, or they don't accept your insurance. So what are survivors supposed to do? So that's what we're also trying to do here. And, with all of that said, this has been so big for me, to not just with the survivors coming into the support groups and things like that, but also me being in there with them as well, because it helps me. It helps me feel justified. It helps me feel like some normalcy with my feelings, because our parental biological timeline completely got disrupted, shattered, and traumatically taken away from us, because children, are not to die before parents. Parents die before children. And when that completely gets disrupted, so does our hearts, and they get completely shattered, and we become different people. One of the questions that I got asked after we lost Brooke about, how long was I going to be grieving for, or, like, how long does it take for me to get over something like this? Those kind of things. I know that it was coming from a great place. People had great intentions, but realistically, for me, never. I always will want my daughter beside me. I will always want her. I will always grieve her, and I will always miss her. And that is okay. I think that, people associate strength with like putting on a happy face and moving forward and looking like that. But realistically, what strength is that I'm asking for help, and I'm asking for support and comfort, because I need it. And that is what true strength in my eyes is. So with that said, we're going to find a silver lining to the death of our daughter. I'm always, like I said, going to want her here. I would give anything, my own life, to get her back here and to have her here. Okay. So, and I think putting a positive spin on it, or saying, everything happens for a reason, or, who knows, like she, could have had all these health issues or whatever it is. Those kind of things are not okay to say, or to even put, because there is no silver lining here. The one thing, though, that Brooke's life, as brief as it was, but as impactful and touching as it was, is that I actually take the time now to slow down in life and be fully present. I've had significant losses in my life. I've lost grandparents, really close loved ones, family, friends. And this, though, being your child, is just a whole different level of loss for me. So I, now am able to understand life can be taken away from us in such a short amount of time. Of course, never, no day is ever guaranteed or anything like that. But I feel like I understand it and see it so much more now because of Brooke Marie. And for that, I am grateful that I slowed down today, and that I am not constantly on the go, going from this networking event, going to this sales meeting, doing this and jumping all around. I actually get to be present with my family, enjoy the moments, fully disconnect, and be able to see life for what it is. And with the tragedies, there's also beautiful things in life as well. And like I said, just being able to process everything, being able to talk about it, and also know that my feelings are justified and accepted, just really does help me with having around people who understand, or at least can, get where I'm coming from, and who have lived it as well. Since losing Brooke, we went through another significant loss with our, he was only 4 years old, our English Springer Spaniel Rocky. We got him as a puppy in March of 2023, so this year. We found out in March he was like really getting violently sick, stomach issues and things like that. And we had him in the vet for about 2.5 weeks, in and out, thinking maybe he got a hold of something, maybe something happened. Here we found out that he had lymphoma after all these extensive tests. And it was very aggressive, but we wanted to try chemo treatments and all of that. Well, around that, I started having a trauma response. And it was today, like where I'm at, and, seeking out, trauma therapy, and also working through things with other survivors, and having my network, I was able to recognize what exactly was happening in that moment when everything was happening with Rocky. And it was all those feelings of feeling helpless again and hopeless and guilty and blaming myself and doing all of these things, and all of it just completely triggered and opened up everything like it did with the events around Brooke and losing her. And it is like we're 2 years out, and you know, it's still happening. But, having a great pet office or vet office that we went into, who was treating him, and an oncology team that understood and could completely understand that he was, what helped me to get through the trauma. Like, he laid with me in bed as I cried. He would be there to snuggle me, and he helped me get through so much during that time that, I just wanted to save him. I wanted to be able to have a voice because I felt like I didn't in the midst of everything with Brooke. And I wanted to advocate for him and do all these things, but there just was nothing we could do. And even though we tried doing chemo treatments with him after 2 rounds, he ended up passing away at our house. And when that happened, everything got stirred up again. And I was just grateful to have the support network that we do today and having Chasing the Rainbows. But I think it's really important to recognize those things and to know that, these things are going to happen again, right? And because life is a roller coaster, and it's filled with beautiful things, good, bad, ugly, but then, also a positive side of things. With life comes death, right? So it was a different experience knowing that I had a room of people to turn to on a daily basis. Because it's all, around loss and bringing up and stirring up all of those emotions again. I think it's just great to bring up because, if someone out there has been through a baby loss of any sort, and even meaning, fertility loss, your dreams and thoughts and hopes of having a baby, and, pregnancy and infant loss, just know that when reoccurring losses happen, we get it. We understand. And it's comes at different angles. It's, different people in your life, or it could be reoccurring baby losses. It's all very triggering. It's all extremely gut-wrenching and heartbreaking, but we are here. And this is the sole reason why we do what we do on a daily basis. With that said, I believe that is everything I have to share today. Just know, survivors, we are here for you. If you need to call or text, our number is on our website. You can text that number. It is 717-801-1518, 1518. Thank you for tuning in. We are always with you, fertility loss, pregnancy loss, and baby loss survivors. Until next time.